I'm Mangino. Welcome to the Mangino Talks podcast. We talk about everything that matters to Pittsburgh, from current events to Pittsburgh history, social issues to sports, politics to practical day-to-day life. And today, well, we just can't get away from what's happening on the national level. Former President Donald Trump indicted 38 counts. A special counsel, Jack Smith, bringing those counts, had a news conference on Friday. And if you missed it, there is a podcast dedicated to this issue from a legal standpoint. Bruce Ankoviak joined us from St. Vincent College in Latrobe. But right now, I want to talk about this from an intelligence standpoint. I also want to talk about this from a law enforcement standpoint. And there's nobody better to go to than Ron Layton, who is joining us now. Ron is a former member of federal law enforcement, former member of the Secret Service, and he's now joining us on Mangino Talks. Ron, welcome back. Always great to talk to you.
Mr. Mangino, thanks for having me back on Mangino Talks. Looking forward to it.
Give me your assessment, and thank you very much for making time. Give me your assessment when you got the word that a 38-count indictment came down against the former president.
So my general assessment, I think, is a little different. I mean, just from a personal standpoint, during my career, as you know, one of the jobs that I had, I was a chief intelligence officer for the Secret Service, which means that I was the principal liaison to the 17 intelligence community members. So I had frequent contact with, the Department of Defense, the CIA, the NSA, and many others. And so I can remember when I was trying to get the job, I had to apply for something called a TS SCI clearance. And what that means is that you have access to really the nation's crown jewels in terms of information, how we keep the United States safe. And, the thing is I remember when I was going through the clearance process, my polygraph was 6 hours. They went around and knocked on every door, from doors at Central Catholic to my neighborhood on Robinson Street in a Lower Hill, Oakland area. Every place I had lived, my friends, they knocked on the door, and Mrs. Dorothy Flowers around the corner, probably 85 years old all the time. Hey, how long have you known this kid? Since he was a little boy. Decent guy? Yeah, a good kid. But it comes down to this. At some point, when you get these clearances, what it really means is that you've been entrusted with a set of information that is the crown jewels of how we keep our great nation safe. And all of those people and those processes that I just mentioned, the question, is, does this person represent someone who is worthy of this kind of responsibility? And so I think about my grandmother, I think of all of those people. And then I think fast forward to when I got the job and ascended through leadership. Robert, every time I came out of the White House and I was, read a top secret document, and I did hundreds of times, right? I always approached it with the level of reverence and conduct that the situation warranted. In other words, the United States and truly the American people, they trust you with that information. So I say that against the backdrop to be able to say my assessment is that I was incredibly disappointed at what I read with respect to the conduct of the former president, and very disappointed in terms of the cavalier, arrogant attitude based on the facts as alleged in the indictment.
Let me play a quote from Jack Smith and his news conference from Friday regarding the issue of national security and to what extent he believes that this information was at grave risk.
The men and women of the United States intelligence community and our armed forces dedicate their lives to protecting our nation and its people. Our laws that protect national defense information are critical to the safety and security of the United States, and they must be enforced. Violations of those laws put our country at risk.
When you look at the 38-count indictment and the information that was mishandled, misstored, and then shown in a couple of examples to other individuals who didn't have anything close to the proper security clearances, is there a legitimate argument in your mind that there were operatives, armed service personnel, and even the country put at risk as a result of the behaviors of Donald Trump?
So that question is the answer to that question is essentially called an assessment, a damage assessment. So in parallel to the investigation and indictment, the things that we're talking about now, fundamentally around the world, everybody's talking about this. The intelligence community, if you remember to the run up to this, they needed access to those documents to try to make a determination of whether the information was disclosed, and if it was disclosed, what were the potential after effects of the disclosure. So a top secret document, or the definition of why is it top secret, fundamentally what it means is that if this information, these programs, whatever it is, if it was disclosed to the public, it would cause grave damage to the United States. And so that assessment is likely ongoing. I can't answer that, but what I can answer is and the reason I can't answer it is I haven't read the documents either, but I have read enough top secret SCI, no foreign documents to know that those programs are among the most sensitive national secrets. And here's the thing, not just about the United States, but oftentimes about our allies as well. One of the things that was most troubling to me in reading the indictment and some of the markings on the documents that were seized is that there was talk about military plans and information regarding our nuclear programs. Those, I mean, now we're talking about, existential threats, because a lot of times those documents will oftentimes have vulnerabilities to the United States. We are only 4% of the world's population. And so I say all that to say that this is a gravely dangerous situation, and the professionals in the IC are likely still trying to run down the damage assessment as well. Another elephant in the room here, I'm not certain that they got everything.
We have talked about this in the past on radio, and one of the things that was discussed was the idea that we had the search warrant that took place in Florida. And is there an argument that there could have been justification for a search warrant at his other homes, so maybe up in New Jersey at Bedminster? Considering what was revealed in these indictments, would there have been a justification in your mind to go and exercise a search warrant in New Jersey, considering there is clear evidence that at least some documents did make it there?
So potentially, this is different as you learn and uncover more information. So the threshold to obtain a search warrant is generally probable cause. But this is different. This is not like, a narcotics case or some other type of case where you're just looking to pierce the probable cause threshold. This is different because it is a presidential property. So you better be on solid footing. The other thing about search warrants is that not only do you need probable cause, the agents need the thought process that it is likely that you're going to find it. Right. And that's another piece of it too. So I don't know enough to know if it's a certainty that they would be able to cross the probable cause threshold, but certainly if the fact pattern had developed to the point where Jack Smith's office thought that there was appropriate PC to go get another one, I mean, look at what he's done so far. He would have certainly pursued it if he thought that he had it.
And you make a really good point about that, in that they had reason to believe the documents were going to be discovered in Mar-a-Lago. And we had talked about this previously on other shows, on what was that information. Was there somebody on the inside, an individual who can say, yes, I saw, there's where it is. The photographs that they released as their evidence, many of those photographs were actually taken by people who worked for Trump, and it was surveillance cameras. So is that what they used to make the case in order to have the search warrant go forward in the first place?
It's what they would have used to bolster the case. I don't think it's one individual piece of information for a search warrant. It's the totality of information that pushes you over over the probable cause threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's another elephant in the room about this particular indictment. If you were in this business and you're working with, the law enforcers, the agents and the U.S. Attorney's Office, a seasoned prosecutor is likely never going to give you everything in the indictment, because why would he or why would she? You can get that other stuff at discovery, but I'm not giving you everything. So that means if you meticulously read through this indictment, you're going to see this is what's alleged among other things. Yeah. Well, a lot of those other things is the stuff that we're not telling you right now, but I can promise you what you read in the indictment might be 75% of what they have. They've got a lot more. But you only need to go past that PC standard. That's thing one. I can't imagine what else they might have, but obviously it's damning. The other stuff is that this indictment, it is laden with cooperators / informants. And so this is one of the things that really, if you're a defendant in this case, you've got real trouble, because it's not just one thing. Right? You can always say, I didn't know it was there, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. But in this particular indictment, they've got text messages, they've got audio, which in itself is damning. But here is the one that really is the accelerator, is the cooperators. There are cooperators known and unknown, and that's with the language in the indictment. They've got quite a bit here. And like I said, I think there's a significant portion of it that's in the indictment, but there's a lot more that's not in that indictment.
Individuals are named as, Attorney 1, 2, 3, people who were working for Trump under Nauta. They are not named. Will they be named to the defense? Will they get those names, or will they remain unnamed until at some point this case goes to trial?
I don't know how you keep them anonymous. I mean, I think everybody could speculate as to who the majority of them are now. Mm-hmm. But they've pierced the veil of attorney-client privilege. And if you look at the indictment, is bolstered by one of the attorneys saying, hey, Mr. Trump said, what happens if we just get rid of this stuff?
Right.
And these are notes in summary by the attorney that are in the indictment.
Yeah, that's a great point.
This is a damning indictment. This is, and to be honest, it is not all that circuitous. It is very straightforward. I mean, there's no magic here. Somebody asked you for something. You said, well, first thing you said is, I'm not giving it back because it's mine. Mm-hmm. The second thing you said is, well, I'm going to give it back. And are you sure you're giving everything back? Yeah. And then we find out it wasn't even close. And then you conspired with others and directed others to say, move this, move that, don't say this, don't say. This is a very straightforward case. It's just unusual and without historical equivalents in the United States.
One of the arguments, Ron, you may recall, was that, well, listen, these documents were all safe at Mar-a-Lago because the president is protected by the Secret Service. The Secret Service is at Mar-a-Lago. Nobody's going to gain access to Mar-a-Lago who shouldn't. We don't need to be worried about these documents because of the Secret Service. And Jack Smith went and made it a point in saying that the Secret Service is there to protect Donald Trump. It is not there to protect any documents or papers that Donald Trump may have.
I actually appreciate the fact that the special counsel went out of his way to do a few things. He mentioned what you said in the indictment with respect to Secret Service authorities and responsibilities. He also went out of his way to talk about the professionalism of Federal Bureau of Investigation agencies, those tasked with the public corruption statutes. But he also went out of his way to say, look, our nation's military and those who were in the IC, they also worked tirelessly to keep us safe. And all of these things were kind of cast aside with cavalier actions by the former president. But I don't think any of that was necessary, and I'll tell you why. It comes down to this. That's nice, and it's a point that needs to be made, but fundamentally, you can't have that stuff outside of a skiff. I'm sure I said that to you on the radio. So it doesn't matter where it was. It can't be next to the toilet. You can't say, well, it was down in the basement and I had a lock on the thing with the camera. No, you can't have it outside of the skiff. One of the things that I thought was interesting within the content of the indictment, the charging document, is that Mr. Trump actually could have applied for a waiver which would have allowed him to maintain the authority to possess, not declassify, but possess some of these documents, I would assume. There are some unusual exceptions with people who have skiffs that can go to a certain classification level in their residences. But he didn't do that. So there's really no place to go after you read the content of the indictment.
Yeah. And it says here that Trump did not inform the Secret Service that he was storing boxes containing classified documents at the Mar-a-Lago club. If the Secret Service were to know that there were documents there based upon Trump's declaration to them, would there be any requirement for the Secret Service to cooperate with any efforts to retrieve those documents back to the federal government?
Very interesting question. The thing that folks have to realize about the service is that they're classified just like a DEA agent is classified or an FBI agent is classified. It's called 1811 in the government speak. It means gun carrying criminal investigator, which is another way of saying the Secret Service are law enforcement officers just like any other federal law enforcement officer. So the requirement for cooperation, of course, I mean, they're cops first who take on as a part of their career and a part of the authorization by the Secret Service, who during the course of their career take on a protective responsibility. But, you know, out of a 25-year career, those agents are only really doing vice presidential or presidential protection for 5 or 6 years. The rest of the activity are oftentimes criminal investigations, and a lot of times in concert with the DEA or the FBI or the postal inspectors or state and local partners. But your question was, you know, would they fundamentally be cooperating like any other law enforcement organization should? The answer is absolutely. Now, the idea of the president going to the service and saying, hey, by the way, those are classified documents over there. Anyone who has spent any time in the service knows that that is an unauthorized area of storage. So that would have presented a series of problems, to be honest.
Okay. It's interesting that it says Trump did not inform the Secret Service that he was storing boxes containing classified information. However, there's no reference here whether or not the Secret Service may have found out independently, because it sounds as though, right, in reading through these 49 pages or so, that there was a cavalier attitude to holding these documents, storing these documents, as you talked about, bathroom and ballroom and everything. It would almost seem as though it could easily be viewed as common knowledge for anybody that was in any of these areas that there were documents that were being held that were documents that rightfully belonged to the federal government and not to Donald Trump.
So something that we've not talked about yet that I think I'd be derelict if I did not mention. So the Mar-a-Lago estate is a country club. And so this would have been a prime target for foreign intelligence officers. So you're from country X or country Y.
Right.
You build yourself a profile, or somebody does it for you. You join the club and you do what spies do. So, I mean, this would have been a blinking red light for anybody who was in the foreign intelligence services to attempt to exploit. And that's not been talked about enough, but that's what foreign intelligence services do. And we try to make it harder by wrapping a rule set around the handling of classified information. That's why we do it.
Yes.
Because we don't want to disclose to other people. So if you think of it in that context, and this stuff is just sitting there, there's almost no more egregious error when it comes to how you handle these things. That's why we wrap those rules around this stuff.
Right. Well, you see, here's what my thinking is. That if I was running a foreign intelligence operation and I wanted to get access to the cracks and crevices of the Mar-a-Lago estate, I'm not going to join and become a member. I'm going to have somebody become an employee.
That too, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yes, so where they have even more access to more of the grounds that any member would, right?
Well, the truth is, in spy world, I don't even need to become an employee. I just need to give $100,000 to somebody who's already an employee.
Oh,
I mean, that's the game.
right.
That is the general level of conduct. That's what intelligence organizations do. This is what's referred to as the tradecraft.
Right.
I don't need to be you. I can just buy your access.
Right. And that's what happened up in New York, right?
Oh my good. Oh yeah, that's a different conversation. But yes,
but
that's what happened. Yeah.
Yes, basically that's what happened up there too. Well, let me get back to this. The documents are so secret that some of them, in reference to the indictments, they don't even let you know who the information was supposed to be for. I'm reading one here: top secret, redacted, Orcon, no foreign. So, one, no foreign national should be able to see this document, but there are then also other classifications that they didn't even feel confident enough to reveal to the American people who these were. It's that secret. Explain to us all how secret these documents could possibly be and the risks associated with letting just even the names of the organizations get out that had access to that information.
So when you look at a classified document, you're going to look at it and it could give information with regard to the health status of a president from another country. It could give information with regard to vulnerabilities associated with maybe the nuclear programs of other countries. It could be information with regard to travel, secret travel from an organization, from a terrorist organization from point A to point B. I mean, it's a spectrum of really highly classified stuff. But what you were just talking about, no foreign meaning not disclosed outside of USPERS, U.S. persons, and the Orcon designation is whited out. What that really means is that is so secret, I'm not even going to tell you who generated the document. That's what the Orcon redaction means. Orcon means original contributor, and that's who came up with. And the reason that they did that is because everybody in the world is reading this. You know who's reading this? The intelligence services from all of our enemies. That's who's reading it, right?
Right.
And so when they read that, they've got classification guides just like we do. And it's likely that they are uncertain about what we knew, what we didn't know, what was held at Mar-a-Lago, what wasn't. So they're trying to figure this stuff out too. So why are we making it easy for them? We're not. So those items would be redacted. And so there's certain agencies that do certain things that we just don't want you to know that that agency does that. So you're just going to redact the Orcon. But the overarching point is that these matters are so sensitive, and it's the disclosure would danger the lives of not just, perhaps American citizens working overseas or some of our operatives working overseas, but potentially the people that we've recruited to spy for us. I mean, this is all the realm of intelligence.
Ron Layton once again joining us. And when it comes to this intel, these classified documents, are there documents that rise to the level of being so secret that it's nearly impossible to declassify them?
Yeah, sure. So those documents are oftentimes the documents associated with our nuclear capabilities. Those documents oftentimes will come, a player in the intelligence community, and I mean a huge player, that oftentimes, people think NSA or CIA or one of those organizations. A big player is actually the Department of Energy. So those are the folks. Right now, you're talking nuclear stuff, right? So a president may not declassify that type of national defense information. And here's the other thing too, Mr. Mangino. Some of this stuff is so secret, it will never see the light of a courtroom. And oftentimes, it's how we got it. It's so sensitive to the ongoing betterment and the ongoing safety and security of the United States that we cannot disclose what we know or how we got it. That's what's contained potentially in some of these documents. So it will never be entered into evidence. and it just won't be talked about because it can't be.
Right. When you look at this case and Trump and him having national security secrets, confidential information at his property, and Joe Biden having it at his property, two different locations, one in an office, others at his home, and a couple of locations inside the home, Pence having documents at his place. How do you clearly see the differences in these three incidents where you have one former president that's facing charges and you have a sitting president and a former vice president that almost certainly will not be facing any charges?
So I don't like any of it. And I'll tell you what, there are people who would say, if whoever you think Joe or Jane average citizen is, if you engaged in this conduct, what would be the outcome? So if we're having this conversation, while there are stark differentiators between the former president, the former vice president, and the current president, I got to tell you, if I had classified information when I was in the government, my clearance would have been taken and I likely would have been fired and perhaps gone to jail. So even for those other offenses that do not reach the same level of egregiousness, just regular Joe or Jane Doe, you lose your clearance, you'd be out of a job and likely go to jail. And I've said this before to you on the radio. You can't have this stuff. People want to make it more complicated than that, but you can't. You can't have this stuff. But for some, the Justice Department has decided, particularly for some officials, if there's no willful retention, in other words, if it appears to be an accident, hey, I didn't pack the boxes. When I found out, I made a call to the Bureau or to appropriate authorities, and I gave it back. That seems to be the differentiator between the former president and the current president and the former vice president. I found it, and not only that, when I found it, in the case of some, I said, come on in and search. So I consented to a search. There was not legal process of a subpoena or certainly a search warrant. So that's kind of the big deal, because I can pretty much promise you, in the case of the former president, the court likely said, these declarations, these people are lying to me. And the reason that I can say that is because one of the charges in the indictment is false statements.
Is there anything that you want listeners to know about this case, these indictments, this former president, that they may not have heard already, either in this show or other news that they're taking in as a result of the announcement of these charges?
Yeah, so what I would say is that, and a lot of other people have said this, go read the indictment. It's going to be hard for some folks to put into context what I call intel world, which is cop world versus cop world. Most Americans will not have a clue about what a top secret document is, these letters, SCI, no foreign, that kind of stuff. So it's going to be hard to contextualize the level of offense that we're talking about here. But one of the things that I wanted to do during the course of our podcast and our conversation is that I actually wanted to bring it back down to a personal level. When some agent knocked on my door and they said, is Ron trustworthy enough to hold these kinds of secrets? And all of those other people put enough trust in me to go, yeah, as they did all of my other fellow agents who went through the same process. That means something. And how you conduct yourself means something. And as you ascend in leadership, it doesn't matter what level of leadership, but as you go up, what that really means is that there has to be enhanced accountability. That's what I want people to know. That's what I've taught people when I've mentored them for leadership responsibilities. It's not just that you're a bigger boss. It's leading by the eloquence of an example, and it's enhanced accountability. And think about what I said versus what you read and come to your own conclusion.
There you go. Yeah, let's not hold people to the lowest political standard, but hold everyone to the highest of ethical standards. And maybe this country will get to be a bit better. I want to wrap this up.
How about the place we want it to be? How about that?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Interesting statements. According to this indictment, page 9, they went back and they pulled quotes of Trump during the time of the campaign in 2016, where he said, "In my administration, I'm going to enforce all laws concerning the protection of classified information. No one will be above the law." That's August 18th, 2016. September 6th, 2016, quote, "We also need to fight this battle by collecting intelligence and then protecting our classified secrets. We can't have someone in the Oval Office who doesn't understand the meaning of the word confidential or classified." Isn't it remarkable, Ron, that these quotes are just so powerful at this point, and you look at what he claimed and what was clearly important, and you can't dispute the statements, but then to go and then act in complete contradiction to these statements.
So one of the things that I said was that I was disappointed. And I was disappointed in that brand of leadership, which should represent the highest standard of leadership. And again, it's what I just said, is that as you ascend in your leadership journey, it's increased accountability. And so you see words and then you see conduct, and the two are incongruent.
Right.
And he's going to pay for it.
One last statement. This is Trump as president, July 26th, 2018. And he said this: "As the head of the executive branch and commander-in-chief, I have a unique constitutional responsibility to protect the nation's classified information, including by controlling access to it." More broadly, the issue of a former executive branch official's name, security clearance, raises larger questions about the practice of former officials maintaining access to our nation's most sensitive secrets long after their time in government has ended. Such access is particularly inappropriate when former officials have transitioned into highly partisan positions and seek to use real or perceived access to sensitive information to validate their political attacks. Any access granted to our nation's secrets should be in furtherance of national, not personal interests. And Ron, one final thought. It has been surmised that the reason why he took these was to be able to just do nothing more than brag, to potentially have information that would be advantageous to him in a political sense and may be of value to him economically moving forward as well. Do all three of those come across to you as being realistic possibilities for why he would decide to do what he did?
You know, they're possibilities, but they're less relevant to me based on, you know, the fact pattern as alleged in the indictment. One of the things, too, that I don't want to be lost in our conversation, particularly when it comes to clearances and former officials, the intel process and clearances are based on three words: need to know. I mean, that's a bedrock premise of how this really works. Mm-hmm. If you leave office, listen, you've got to go out of your way to establish why you need to know. And the truth is, if I was a boss for the day, I would simply do this. When you leave office, your clearances are done. And if you need to know, I can reinstate and give you a provisional 30-day clearance, mm-hmm. or 2 week or 1 week. So I would do it something like that. But it's all need to know stuff. We didn't talk about it during the course of the podcast, but need to know morphed from need to share and likely became a little bit more problematic. But to stay on course here, he may have found value in different ways of initiating more levels of self-aggrandizement. That's what I kind of got mm-hmm. reading the indictment, and it was a cavalier kind of an attitude wherein, you know, I could show this to you, but I really can't because it's a secret. Like that kind of conversation back and forth. And likely for executive leadership, I mean, I don't know another way to characterize that other than cavalier and somewhat immature.
Ron Layton.
And potentially dangerous.
Yes, Ron Layton, former member of federal law enforcement, Secret Service, and guest today on Mangino Talks. Ron, thank you very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right, do me a favor. Hold tight right there for a second. Thank you for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast. New episodes drop Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. For more on me, the show, and anything you want me to talk about, be sure to visit ManginoTalks.com and send me an email. Follow me on your favorite social media platform by using @ManginoTalks, or you can just Google Mangino Talks. Once you find me, please like, follow, subscribe, and share the pages with your friends and your family. And thank you once again for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast.